So I was talking to someone in the program, and I said, selfishness and self-seeking, that's my problem. I'm just shot through with selfishness, that I can get on a jihad that, I'm really going to help other people. I'm going to commit myself to volunteering here, and I'm just going to put my ego aside there, and really going to think of others in this situation, but never really lost very long. So, well, at least there I missed hitting the pedestrian, so I got to give myself props for that. And I'm going to avoid a head-on collision there. So that's actually a line from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Selfishness and self-seeking is our problem. And I think it's the problem for about half the population. I remember when I was growing up, there were great kids who would, they wanted to volunteer. Like if there were a bunch of retarded kids coming to visit the school, they wanted to volunteer to kind of push them around on wheelchairs. I did not volunteer to push the retarded kids around on wheelchairs. I was off to the side making fun of the retarded kids. Not very spiritual of me. And I grew up in Currumbong, Australia, right outside Avondale College, and there was this big mental home right nearby, and all the loonies would walk by my friend's house to the store. And so I figured, well, they're lunatics, right? They're absolutely balmy. They're off their rocker. So they would often be carrying a radio. So I thought, oh, sweet. I tried to trade them, figuring they were lunatics. I tried to trade them a stick or my underwear in exchange for their radio. And even though they were lunatic, they weren't so lunatic as to make any of the bad deals that I was. Like other kids, they would volunteer to go visit the old folks' home, or they would be glad to help out visiting the sick and the less fortunate. And come on, guys, I'm trying to drive here. So the kids who like to help out, by and large, these were, of course, the healthiest kids that come from the healthiest families, basically just happy, good-natured, good people. And they grew up to be happy, good-natured, successful adults with marriages and spouses and mortgages and children and communal responsibility and professional respect. But about half the population is just absolutely shot-filled with selfishness and self-seeking. And you may ask, like, why the hell? You know, what's going on there? And my theory is that, it's not my theory, I heard this, but it makes sense. When you punch a hole in a kid's soul when they're really young, when there's stuff in their early childhood where they don't learn the basics of human connection and maintaining relationships, then they just have some programming indelible in the hippocampus, but some programming up here in the brain, so they don't quite get that whole human connection thing. And so because they don't know how to connect normally, they start looking for forms of excitement or distraction to deal with the pain. And you can tell them, oh, be less selfish, help other people, that's the secret to happiness. But when someone's got like this gaping psychic wound, just like if someone's got, a bone sticking out through their skin, that's all they can think about. So usually when you're dealing with someone who's incredibly selfish, such as me through much of my life, telling them to be less selfish just is not going to work, because the way they've been wired from early childhood is they just have such a gaping wound in their psyche, that just as when you have a toothache, you're not really able to think about anything else. So when you have this soul ache, so that you don't know how to connect normally with other people, all the resolutions in the world, or like all the geographic changes and religious changes and self-help programs, by and large, I just don't think it works. I mean, have you ever known someone who is incredibly selfish and then they just decided to become unselfish and they pulled it off? Like, I'm just not aware of that. Have you ever known someone who's incredibly selfish and self-centered, and then they got told, oh, you should be less self-centered, you should start thinking about other people, you should care about other people, you should do some volunteering, and then it worked, it stuck, it made a permanent change? I'm just not aware of that. And just from my own experience, like the wound is so large that resolutions to be less selfish just don't work. That you need an overall soul as one person put it, it's not so much about thinking less of yourself, it's about thinking of yourself less. It's not about thinking lowly of yourself, it's about perception of yourself. And I know it seems like about half the population suffers from the same thing that I've suffered from almost all my life, like feeling like I'm a piece of crap that the whole universe revolves around. Now, if you're a selfish person, self-centered person, it does not come naturally to want to change that. In all likelihood, because you're in so much pain, because I guess your basic needs weren't met in early childhood, it verges on the impossible to, on a sustaining basis, think about other people. But the problem is, you're just going to run your life, right into a hole. You're just going to run right into a brick wall, because selfish, self-centered people don't tend to enjoy much success in life. They don't tend to have many friends. They don't tend to sustain relationships. They don't tend to be liked and respected by other people. They don't tend to be rich. They don't tend to be successful. They don't tend to be happy. Instead, they tend to be addicts. They tend to be underowners. They tend to be debtors and sex addicts and alcoholics and drug addicts. So then when your life just goes completely off the rails, only then are you willing to, I got to do things a different way. So for me, for example, I've had this compulsion whenever I join a community. I just always wanted to use my verbal ability to make fun of other people and to show that I'm more intelligent than everyone else. Like in my second grade report card, it says, Luke's always very willing to share his opinions with the class, but he needs to learn to be more considerate of the slower thinker. So I've always been willing to share my opinions. I've always been willing to make fun of other people. Surprisingly, this did not make for a happy and successful life. This did not endear me to people. I remember when I moved to the United States in May of 1977, I met some of my future classmates at the Pacific Union College pool, and upon being introduced to them, I just started splashing water in their faces, and they all hated me, and we didn't connect very well. None of them wanted to have me in their life. Like none of them said, "Oh, let's make plans to get together." Like I met them, I splashed water in their face, and that was it. And one of them, about 3.5 years later, his mother said to him, "Oh, I want you to invite Luke home for Sabbath lunch." So he'd never invited me home for Sabbath lunch, or never like ever made plans with me. But his mother and he didn't want to, because he just thought I'd make fun of him, or I'd make fun of his family, or I'd be a lousy guest, or he didn't want to do it. But his mother forced him to do it, and then the guy ended up being my best friend through high school, through my teens, and he and his family just played an amazing role in my life after that. But because of my hostile ways, I'd just cut off all possibilities of human connection with my future classmates, with my present classmates. They just remembered me as a guy who loved to argue. This other woman in high school, she was 3 years older than me, and she says, like, we just remember him as this guy who's just incredibly hostile, always wanting to argue. Like a lot of people from my teens and before my teens, they just remember me as this hostile guy who always wanted to show off how smart he was, and like always wanted to argue. And surprisingly, people didn't want to, generally speaking, connect to someone like this. Like even many of my friends from my teenage years just remember me as a big jerk, just as an a-hole. So when you have as much failure as I've had in my life, then you become willing to look for a different way. And the whole reason that I'm particularly concerned about my tendency to lead a selfish, self-centered life is that when I do that, I just completely just drive my life into a brick wall. So, for example, me leading a selfish, self-centered life, generally speaking, means that I live a life revolving around satisfying my three basic instincts: sexual, social, survival. Sex and romance, social status, showing how smart I am, and survival, meaning taking care of my economic necessities. And when I'm just focused on meeting my basic needs without regard to the repercussions of my behavior on other people, well, I don't tend to meet my basic needs very well. I tend to hurt other people. They retaliate. I get mad. I retaliate. It's a vicious cycle of retaliation, recrimination. It just doesn't work. So, for example, in community, certain problems I've had, no matter what community I've joined, I've loved to make fun of other people. I've loved to mock the community that I'm joining. It's been really important to me to try to demonstrate that I'm smarter than everybody else, and I've pretty much tried to take over every community I've ever joined, and surprisingly that's not worked out very well. So when I have this history of such enormous failure with living in community, then like now at 52 years of age, I'm willing to look at different ways of doing things. It's like, okay, the way I've been doing things does not work. So when I join this community now, I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to just look to be useful to the community. If there's some task that no one else wants to do, I will volunteer to do it. I know that I tend to talk too much and try to show off, so I'm going to abstain from speaking out publicly, asking public questions or challenges. I'm just going to let that go. I'm going to have a keen sense of how I've made myself an unwanted part of community after community after community, largely by trying to demonstrate how smart I am. So I'm just going to let that go. Instead, just be satisfied being, a worker among workers, just another member of the community, someone who wants to contribute, and just let go of my desire to show that I'm smarter than everyone else. Let go of my desire to make fun of everyone else. and just be one of the group. And I know I'm not going to completely obliterate these sharp tendencies of mine, so I'll just say, okay, I just won't flash them in public. Okay, I'll kind of save them for one-on-one time with my friends. Okay, with people with whom I have a relationship. Then, with them, I'll be willing to share my nasty satirical side. Or with my friends one-on-one, I'll be willing to share my brilliant cutting insights. But I won't be standing up in synagogue making announcements and pronouncements and challenges and asking questions. I'm just gonna let that go. And then in the workplace, I've often gotten into trouble for saying provocative things, for hitting on women. I remember I was an extra on this movie set, and I think there were like 12 women extras on the set, and I hit on every single one. And I think 11 out of the 12 ended up complaining to the casting director about my behavior. And then I did get to go out with one of them. I was successful with one of them. I think I was like 27 at the time, and she was about 46. But I got to go out with her. But obviously, as a background player, you don't want to be creating waves and ripples and complaints with your, the other background players. So, that selfish tendency of mine just didn't work. So it's time for a new way of doing things. So also with employment, my tendency is never to put much effort into it unless it's getting me a maximum of attention. But that didn't work out real well for me, so I had to kind of reprogram myself, because I was getting into trouble with saying rude, obnoxious, offensive things. I was trying to develop inappropriate relationships with coworkers. I was not paying much attention to my work. I was trying to do as little work as possible. I was trying to just get by with the least effort possible, and that didn't work out. So instead, one of my 12-step programs, I just kind of wanted to change my disposition, just kind of the whole way I was relating, so that instead of just thinking, okay, what's the maximum that I can squeeze out of this exchange for me, instead thinking, okay, how can I be of service to my employer or to my client? I've traditionally gone through my life, just almost every interaction, thinking, okay, what's the maximum that I can squeeze out of this interpersonal interaction for me? And that did not tend to work out very well. So instead, if I got a client, Alexander Technique client, instead of trying to show off what massive changes I can bring about in their attention patterns, but instead I can focus on just being a good teacher, just trying to teach the basics of the technique that they can then implement themselves. So try to be as useful to them as possible, instead of trying to show off what an amazing teacher I am. So remember that as an Alexander Technique teacher, my main task is just simply to transmit and to teach the certain principles of movement and use of the self. That's my job as an Alexander Technique teacher. It's not to show off how innovative and edgy and controversial and brilliant I am. It's just, my task is to show off the basics of the technique, which has been working for people for 100 years, and just transmit those principles. Okay, bye-bye.